Happy Sunday night. Looks like we got about 5 or 6 people that have already joined live, so that's exciting. Welcome. And big welcome to Chris back to the show, my good liberal buddy. And then I am so excited to welcome Kyle back. We haven't seen you in a couple of weeks, brother. I know you've been down with COVID and all that. How are you feeling, man? How you doing?
Yeah, man, I really appreciate the kind thoughts, the prayers, the positive vibes, the energy, whatever it is that people were sending my way. I definitely appreciate it. Definitely feeling a lot better now. Still got a little bit of a cough, but I'm doing a lot better now.
Dude,
Thanks.
I'm so glad you're doing better. I mean, so what do you remember what day it was that you tested positive? Was it like, has it been 2 weeks? I forget exactly how long.
Yeah, it's been a little bit longer than that. It's been about 2.5 weeks ago. I really started feeling bad on a Tuesday with a sore throat and a cough, and then the next day, the Wednesday, was it was terrible. I had a terrible headache, fever, chills, the whole thing. So I went and got tested, did a rapid test that day, came back positive, and then of course got the other test on Friday, with the confirmation. And unfortunately, it spread to my mom and dad, my sister and brother-in-law, their kids. Everyone got it. So it's been a time. Luckily, we're all on the upswing.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. It's wild because, and I had it over Christmas, and then we're pretty sure that my wife had it, but then I think I told you she tested negative, and I said, it was probably just a bad test.
Yeah.
Retest. She tested negative twice. Second time she was negative, and then she got the antibody test a few weeks ago, and that was negative too. So did I even have it? I don't know, but I did test.
Crazy, man. Yeah.
It is, but everybody's symptoms too are different and all that. So I feel for you, man. I'm so glad you're doing better. That's awesome. It's really great to hear. And then
Thanks,
over the past couple of weeks, we've kind of kept the show going. It's been me and Chris, but I'm really looking forward to getting your perspective on the issues that we're going to get into tonight. Because now that we've kind of gotten past the election coverage, we've spent months, it felt like, on that, covering everything to the lead up to the actual election, to afterwards, and all the fallout. We can start to get into some of these deeper, bigger issues, and that's what I want to look at this evening. In about the 15-20 minutes that we do this show, I want to look at this notion of welfare, because I felt like it's come up several times, and that's why I'm excited to get the 3 different perspectives that we have here, along with any comments that people want to throw in about this notion of welfare. Because I think this was triggered by Rush Limbaugh. I was doing a show first with Chris, and then our podcast talking about Rush Limbaugh, and there was a speech that he gave years ago about welfare where he talked about conservatives' views on it, and we see welfare as this big hindrance that prevents people from being able to live their lives. And as a result, we're not trying to control people, we're not trying to harm them or take things away from them. We want them to succeed, and that's their view. And so many people were like clapping, and they were applauding, and excited about that speech. And I wonder if that's still true today. And I also wonder what your guys' take on it is, because I think about this, talking about COVID, Kyle, which obviously you're familiar with, and all of us are over the past year of dealing with this. Look at this. I mean, it looks like we're about to hit our 6th round of federal aid. If you want to talk about welfare, there's enormous amounts of welfare that are coming down in this nearly $2 trillion bill. Again, it's our 6th one. People are about to get, personal checks again for their family members up to a certain income amount. There's small business, there's unemployment, business benefits. So a lot of welfare coming. And I think the thing that's so interesting to me about it is that, I mean, this in many ways, maybe this bill isn't particularly bipartisan. I know most Republicans are against it, but Trump was pushing many of his own bills for COVID aid, and people said absolutely. He actually, if you go back just a few weeks, Trump was raking Mitch McConnell over the coals for not putting more aid in some of the bills that the Senate ratified. So it almost seems like we've kind of moved past any, notion that welfare is a hindrance in the conservative movement among Trump supporters. So I wonder if that's bipartisan. That's what we're going to get into tonight. So we'll start with Chris first. Kyle, we'll give you a minute to get warmed up back into the swing of things. But
sure.
Talk to me about the notion of welfare. How do you see it? Is it always a help? And then particularly in this age of COVID, do you think it's enough? Do you think there should be more or less?
Well, first, let me just say I'm really happy to have Kyle back on the show. We've really missed your libertarian perspective. I'm glad you're doing better. I'm glad your family is okay. Otherwise, I would have felt really bad about pointing out that as the liberal on the show, I am the only one out of the three of us to have not come down with COVID. So there might be some.
Hey, for what it's worth, a liberal gave it to me. We traced the source. Hardcore lefty gave it to my family. But that's beside the point. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's your fault for hanging out with a hardcore lefty. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, as far as like, Wes, you point out that in the moment, we don't seem to be seeing a whole lot of pushback from conservatives on the, large amount of financial stimulus, on the issue of direct cash aid to families. Yeah. And that's because we're in a crisis. And it seems whenever our country is in a crisis, people suddenly discover Keynesian economics and how awesome it is. We saw in the last financial, Kyle shaking his head. Kyle, you're a libertarian, so you don't necessarily conform to this. But the Republicans and Democrats seem to, always kind of come to an understanding whenever there is a financial crisis that direct cash aid works and that stimulus works. Yeah. We saw it in the last Great Recession, that most economists actually said the stimulus should have been larger to help pull us out of the recession faster. And countries which had more stimulus, rather than belt tightening, rather than austerity, pulled themselves out of the Great Recession faster. And I think the same is probably going to be true of our current crisis, which is caused by this, horrible COVID pandemic. But at least the economic side, I think, can be definitely alleviated by direct cash stimulus. Frankly, I think we should have gotten a lot more than the very paltry checks that we've gotten over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. One of the things that I think has come about with the Trump, revolution within the conservative movement. I mean, you look at like CPAC going on now and stuff, and it's all about him. It's all about how Trump is still at the center of the conservative movement and the Republican Party today. They expect him, they want him to run again in 2024. Even McConnell, who had that, those disagreements and stuff like that, which even he wants him to run again, says he would support him. And with that comes some notion of government spending, because even before COVID, Trump was very big on government spending and programs and things like that. It was simply programs that right-wingers like myself wanted, right? And so I wonder if there is even a small government, perspective anymore in American politics. What do you think, Al?
Well, there definitely is among the classical liberal and libertarian side of things. The problem is, I guess, we don't have that much of a presence. The issue that I have is not necessarily that COVID relief has been passed, although I think you could pretty easily make the case that government was both arsonist and now playing firefighter. The reason that we're in this economic situation is not solely because of COVID. It's because of the government's response to COVID. It was shutting down of the economy, shutting down of small businesses over a disease that has an over 99% survival rate. Look, I had it. It was not good. It was not pleasant, but I made it through. And unfortunately, that's not the case for everyone. That is the case for more than 99% of the people. And so we have to make sure that our response to something that has an over 99% survivability rate is not an absolutely train wrecking the economy. And look, going back to what Chris said, it's, hoping that we had more. The issue is not the amount of relief that's been passed. It's where that money is going. So I have some statistics here for you. From the $900 billion package that was just passed 2 months ago, by the way. It was a relatively bipartisan bill. But just this bill, $900 billion 2 months ago, over $183 billion, which was set aside for PPP, has yet to be allocated. Over $199 billion for healthcare is still unspent. Over $136 billion for expanded unemployment insurance is unspent. And check this, $46 billion, which was allocated for direct stimulus payments, has not been allocated to the citizens either. The problem is not that we're not spending money. The problem is that we're not giving money to the people, right? Especially this bill right here that we have coming down. This is a $1.9 trillion. It's over twice the expense. And unfortunately, Schumer, Pelosi, Biden, that whole crew is not telling us the truth about where this money is going to be spent. I have some more statistics for you. I know I'm kind of going off. It's been a while since I've been on the show, but for what it's worth, as it's stated in the bill, over half of the money that's allocated in this relief bill will not be spent until 2022. The vast majority of it not going to the people. It's going to local and state governments, mostly blue state governments and big city big cities that have impended the largest lockdowns of its citizens. It allocates billions to cover rising Obamacare expenditures, billions to pension funds, massive expansion to Medicare with zero reforms built into this bill. The problem is not that we're not willing to spend money as a society, right? The problem is that we're not spending the money on things it needs to be spent on.
Yeah, it looks like Bill agrees with you. He's one of our followers. He said the only stimulus should be to give the taxpayer back his money. Government likes to pick winners and losers, and it's obvious they're not picking the taxpayer, right? So what are your thoughts, Chris? Do you think the Democrats are failing in this?
I think Kyle definitely has a point about the inefficiency in any welfare system, and in this bill as well. Direct cash payments with no strings attached are the best way to stimulate the economy. But a lot of the reason for the inefficiency is because of so-called welfare reform efforts that have put dozens and dozens of strings and hoops and regulations into getting that money out there. And I don't know if that necessarily applies to this particular bill. I haven't done the research on that, but I could see an argument there. I do think it's hard to look at 500,000 dead Americans, which goes far beyond the initial projections, even the worst case scenario projections at the beginning of this pandemic, and think that the problem is that America locked down too strictly. I think a big part of the problem is that we didn't lock down hardly at all at the beginning. And then that created this very distinct patchwork of lockdown efforts all over the country that were just coming and going whenever people felt like it, whenever, governors felt like implementing them or not implementing them. And if you look at other countries which took much stronger action at the beginning of this pandemic, most of them were able to control it a lot quicker. That's not true of every country. And you've got your share of horror stories all over Europe. But the countries that really did make a strong lockdown effort at the beginning, they're open now because they can be. So to me, the issue is not lockdowns hurting the economy. It's this just completely inconsistent and incompetently done system of patchwork lockdowns, which in a way is inherent to our country because of federalism, which I believe in and think is good for the most part. But it's one of the reasons that right from the beginning, most experts kind of knew that America was not ready for a pandemic of this magnitude. And it has hurt us not only medically, health-wise, but it has also done incalculable damage to our economy.
So what I think I'm hearing is the answer that it seems like we're all really coming up with is that whether welfare is a hindrance or a help really depends on how it's administered. Does that sound right? In terms of if it's direct to the people who need it most, is that something that you would still have a problem with? I mean, especially Kyle. Like, I'm interested in the libertarian position on this because so many times it seems like the critique against libertarians is it ends up being do nothing. Is that we don't want any government involved in hardly anything. And if we had a libertarian president right now, what would their response be to COVID? Would they be doing this? Would they be doing direct cash payments? Would they be doing something more specific or focused, or would they just be saying, nope, you're on your own, freedom, good luck?
Well, I think it's a good question. And because of federalism, because we don't have our president doesn't make the rules for everybody, I think that we would still see a pretty similar situation what we have now, where governors and state and local officials would make their own decisions. And like Chris said, we'd have a patchwork, situation. That's a good question. Frederick Bastiat famously said that government is that great fiction through which everyone wants to live at the expense of everybody else, right? So Bastiat, obviously a libertarian hero. We would probably argue that I would argue that most libertarians would be opposed to a welfare system that is going on in perpetuity might be a best way to say that. And being a sixth round of COVID relief, it seems like perpetuity is the direction that we're going. Just to quote another founding father, James Madison, charity is no part of the legislative duty. And I think that's right. It doesn't make you altruistic or good-hearted or good-natured to vote for to use someone else's resources to combat.
Bill has a great comment here that I wanted to read. I think it'll help as well. He said, traditionally, welfare was through the churches and their associated organizations. You could also look at community organizations. So to be real and to think of real world examples, I look at our church that we go to, And, there's plenty of other institutions you could look at if, you're not religious. But our church it did for months. We were doing giveaways of food and donations to people who need it. And you could just drive through the line. You got a card for the number of people that you had in your household, and people came by. And it was just fresh food, produce, that type of thing that was being given away to the church to be able to distribute to anyone who needed it going through the worst days of the lockdown that we had, here in Florida where I live. I also think about the Bible studies and the community groups and things like that, because there's not just a financial problem to COVID. Even we talk about the
That's
people
right.
who died, which is horrible, but there's also the rest of us living in social isolation, our kids not able to get out and go to school in so many places. I mean, the social degradation, depression, all of those things are not going to be fixed by a $1,400 stimulus check. I mean, great, you
That's
get
right.
PS5 or whatever, right? Like, but that's not going to fix the deeper needs. And I think Bill has a point, and I think we all do, in terms of this welfare. Not it's scratching the surface. Maybe it's doing some level of good, but is it really helping in a deep way? Is it actually making a difference on the problem? That's
Right. So
go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say. So I think someone like Milton Friedman, an Austrian economist, libertarian economist, he would say that the government has no responsibility to help the poor. Individuals do. That would be the most libertarian response. Is that government has no, and echoes what Madison says, that charity is no part of the legislative duty, and that it's up to the individuals and communities and churches and 4-H clubs and neighborhoods and communities to look after each other and things like that.
What are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, Milton Friedman was open to the idea of a universal basic income, although I think the way that
Sure.
he around that was through a few different measures. But I do want to respond to Bill Yeager's comment, because churches and other community groups doing charity is a wonderful thing. And you are absolutely right that that can build a stronger sense of connection, of community, than a distant, cold welfare system. But I think if you look at just the numbers, what the traditional model of private charity did not do was it did not significantly cut poverty. And if you look at the creation of the War on Poverty and the Great Society programs in the late 60s, early 70s, the numbers show that poverty was cut in half within 10 years. And even though poverty has fluctuated a lot since then and gone up and down and has not been a consistent drop, it has never once gone up to pre-Great Society levels. So I think if you just look at the sheer material gain and the sheer results of the welfare system, I think it has been a success, and I think the numbers don't lie on that.
I think
now,
go ahead.
it has not ended poverty, but I do believe that it succeeded in drastically cutting poverty among every demographic group.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could do a whole nother show on. This is a very big topic. So when we get into the history of this, I think the Great Society would be something to look at. Great Depression, we could look at what got us out of that. Those are two of the bigger debates on this that we could get into. One of the things that I look at, and I know we've talked about, how do you keep government focused and small? Intergovernmental revenue is a big thing for me, in terms of the federal government, instead of just giving cash payments to people to spend on whatever, of reimbursing states and cities and towns and counties for PPE that's spent to respond to COVID, the FEMA grants that come from those type of things. It's more directed. There's all kinds of other ways to do this.
The problem with that is that a state like California, for example, is reporting a $10 billion surplus right now, and they received how many hundreds of billions of dollars or tens of $billions in stimulus over the past several months or year or so of this. Same thing with Charlotte. Charlotte has a huge a surplus right now of unallocated PPP funds and just in general COVID stimulus packages, right? So anyway, just something to think about.
Okay, so as we progress into this debate, there is this notion still within conservatism that welfare in itself is a hindrance. And there was a comment from one of our shows, I think it was last week, where one of our followers, coming from the conservative side, said they struggled to watch our episode because of Chris. And this follower is a single mom. She worked and did not depend upon the government, working 2 to 3 jobs, and She said that I think people who take advantage of welfare are lowlifes. Rush was a truth teller, talking about Rush Limbaugh, and people that hate him are the ones that want handouts and to ride on the backs of those that work. And then she said she had zero respect for Chris and apparently his mother. So, how do we have this discussion? And I'll give it to you, Chris, to respond. But how do we have this discussion? How do we see people? Because we're kind of talking about this a little bit more in the abstract here at times. But in terms of how do we see the recipients of welfare, I think is a question, too, that we're going to have to dwell on for a while. And how do we see each other on this show? How do we talk to each other and respect one another? So I'll give that to you, Chris, because I've already kind of given my thoughts on that comment before. But feel free.
Yeah, I understand her comment because I also often struggle to watch myself on this show. But yeah, it's hurtful. And not that it's any of her business, but my mom did work, just like millions of people who are on welfare and benefit from government assistance in this country. But I do thank her for proving my point that I made on the last show about Rush Limbaugh and about his modus operandi. You had this quote from Rush Limbaugh where he was talking about how conservatives are motivated by compassion and love and principles. And here's one of his devoted viewers proving that was just a crock of bull. So, it's sad to see that there were so many people who were led to believe by Rush Limbaugh that they should blame the lowest and poorest in society for their problems, rather than the system that made her feel the need to work 2 to 3 jobs while being a single mother, which she shouldn't have to do. No one should have to do that. She chooses to blame people who are, in different circumstances than she is. So I find that sad. But you're right. The way that we talk to each other on this show, hopefully, is a good antidote to that. And hopefully, some of your viewers who spent decades indoctrinated by the kind of hateful rhetoric of Rush Limbaugh will get something out of this show and see that you can listen to people who disagree with you and can be respectful and civil.
Well, one of the things that I think about to start to kind of bring this to a close is it's not about independence or dependence from government for me. I think sometimes in the conservative movement, we get to a point where we don't think that the government should exist at all, or that every single politician is corrupt. And that's not the system that our founders intended. Our founders intended a system where people had to work together in order to get anything done because they were suspicious of power. It wasn't politics, it wasn't government, and it wasn't politicians necessarily. It was this notion of consolidated power that they were skeptical of. And that's why they had the federalism that we're talking about, separation of powers and everything else. And to get to this point where we think that some people are dependent and other people are not, that in itself, I think, is a falsehood, because we look to the government for police, we look to it for fire departments, we look to the government for so many things, roads. Anytime you're going to a public park, that type of thing, anytime you are expecting a tax return, right? Like you're going through a government service every day of your life. And it's not about dependency, it's about how do we interact with that government, how does it do its job, and then how do we do ours, right? And that includes people not taking advantage of the system, but at the same time having a system for those that are in desperate need for things that can never be solved any other way. We all look to the government after 9/11. We all look to the government in times of crisis. And I think COVID is part of that. And that's where Edmund Burke, who we named our channel after, gives me inspiration to be able to navigate through those crises and then to be able to kind of back away from some of those big measures once we get out of them, right? And I think so many people don't live in that reality, as they have this stereotypical view without even knowing the person. So I tend to agree with, I see her side of it. I see the skepticism of welfare, but I don't think that we should take it to that personal level, as we've discussed before. So anyway, hey, thank you guys. That's an amazing discussion that we had. I think we're going to have to do this several times because it's such a big issue, but I really, really enjoyed it. I do want to invite you guys to be able to come back next week as we get into this. If there's more comments, we had a bunch of them on this show. Feel free to send us more, and these guys will obviously respond. We do have our next show coming up here in about 5 minutes, which is going to be Conservatism on Tap. So I'll let you guys head out. Thank you so much. Either one of you want a last word here before we head out for the week?
Glad you're doing well, Kyle.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Hey, tune in for the next show. G.K. Chesterton, the Prince of Paradox, one of the best writers that England ever had to offer. So there
We
you go.
go. Yeah, we're going to get into that next one. And if there's other topics that people want us to debate, let us know. Send those in the comments. Don't forget our website, theberkinconservative.com, on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And I will see you guys next week.